going to be a little bit of a race to define what the new meta is.
There's a lot of people out there in Web3 that are deploying a new shiny every day. The new shiny can blow up quite easily as well, and it does often.
There's a lot of trend chasing that happens in the world of crypto. The biggest value that decentralized networks bring to the table is they can operate so cheaply relative to centralized networks. I don't think any platform that is not pointing themselves at mobile is going to survive in the long term. Mobile phones are only getting more powerful. Mobile networks are only getting stronger and more stable. We're very much at a decision-making point for the ecosystem.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Next Billion podcast, where we're talking to the entrepreneurs, the builders, that are people doing real things. We have one of those real people doing real things with us again today. We have Frank from GenesysGo. Frank, thanks for joining us again. We're going to have a bit of an update chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
It's always great to have you. And I think so. We last met not too long ago at Crossroads, where you were doing one of the important announcements for GenesysGo and what you guys are up to. We can touch on a little bit of that. But I guess firstly, maybe since last we spoke, what's your sentiment of the market, of where things are at right now? This is being recorded in about the middle of June sometime. So maybe we're past the crazy times of, well, I don't know, maybe things are always crazy. But it seems like numbers going down and everyone's getting mad and throwing things at each other. But what's your take on sentiment and stuff going on in Solana right now?
You know, we're kind of at a crossroads, right? We're from a meta standpoint, from a macroeconomic standpoint. You know, I think crypto, when it first launched and crypto tokens were starting to become a thing, you know, they were put forward as like this thing that's, you know, completely disconnected from like the macroeconomic environment. At this day and age, we're seeing that, you know, they're much more closely aligned than ever. And so, you know, the Fed's kind of at a divergence, trying to decide what they want to do, and the markets are very closely following that. But I also think, you know, we're slowly starting to see the most recent meme coin mania start to die out a little bit, and
which is probably a good thing.
Personally, I think so. The question is, you know, what meta will replace it? It's always something to be said for the devil you know as opposed to the devil you don't. But so I think there's just a lot of unknowns currently that are trying to be priced in by people. And, you know, when that happens, people start to sell. They start to look around and say, what's the next big thing? Let me make sure that I've got, you know, dry powder available. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of what we're seeing.
Yeah. And we've both seen a few cycles now, and these sort of things come and go. There's always some sort of trend, some sort of thing which people want to latch onto. I guess the good news is that a lot of what's happened in the last 8 months, it's been Solana leading the charge, whether it's the meme coins or whatever else has been going on. It's all been happening on Solana. So I think most of this recent cycle has been Sol, which has been good. Do you think that maybe it's a reset and people are evaluating what are the projects that have been around? What are the legit things that are not going to blow up tomorrow or something like that? Do you think we'll ever get to that point, or is that wishful thinking?
I think we'll get there. But there's always going to be that subsection of people that they're always looking to take their money and they're going to pull it out of something, you know, that they maybe believe in, something that, you know, to your point, is very real. And they're going to go dump it into, you know, a meme coin in hopes that they can 10x their money and then go buy back into that original project that they're very passionate about. So yeah, I think it's, you know, it's kind of hard to say. There's a lot of trend chasing that happens in the world of crypto. We saw it with the tail end of meme coins, when you started to see like Hollywood celebrities coming out and all of them were releasing a coin all of a sudden. And, you know, a lot of people went and chased that. And so the question becomes in the Sol ecosystem, how much risk management does the community actually have for themselves? How much of their bags are they, you know, putting into chasing the trend versus kind of having a diversified portfolio? And so, that'll also be interesting to see how that plays out over the next X number of months.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. And I want to get into some of the metrics as well for what you guys are doing, because I think that's the best way to frame a discussion about things being real projects. You know, a project will come along, they'll appear yesterday and they'll go, we're real and we're legit. And people go, oh, you're real and legit then. Oh, okay, cool. Because you said so. But let's right. Get into some of the metrics going on with ShdwDrive and everything that you guys are doing. So I saw recently there was an article on Solana Floor, 188 terabytes of storage available. I think, you know, is that something that you see sort of growing? What are the sort of trends in that? Is that one of the core metrics for you? Or is it, you know, number of node operators? Or is it number of people providing storage? Whatever it might be, what are some of the core metrics which are important to you guys as you're building ShdwDrive?
So I think, it's important to like create a distinction first, right? Between what you're talking about, like with the metrics that were recently published on Solana Floor as relates to, that being like version 1.5, right? So that's the live ShdwDrive platform that's out there, which at the moment, is a federated network, right? It's a permission network. When we first launched it, node operators applied and joined the network. And so you see mainly enterprise level providers providing storage for that, right? And then there's like V2, which is like the full deployment, kind of the final form of ShdwDrive as envisioned as a, truly trustless, fully decentralized storage network. And that's the version that's coming later on this year. That's like the end state for us, at which point, we'll start to like drive, the messaging, the marketing, and put a lot of focus on onboarding independent operators, making that super easy, especially given, that it's going to be entirely mobile storage or mobile device powered storage that makes it so easy for anybody to join, right? And so, as relates to V1.5, for us, that's like we're big on iterative processes, right? We're big on cycles, development cycles in which we move the ball forward a little bit. And V1.5 was, our development cycle where we said, okay, well, let's build the storage platform. Let's get used to like us as a team, get used to managing a group of decentralized operators in a controlled environment, if you will. And, we've learned a lot from that over the past year and some change. And so the storage available isn't something that we like look at and say, yes, like that's a key metric for V1.5. What we look at for like V1.5 is, number of storage accounts that have been created, right? Which is like 17, 18,000 or something like that.
Yeah, close to 20,000, something like that.
20, yeah, it's about what I thought, yeah. So we look at those numbers for V1.5, right? And for us, 1.5 is... it's not just a test ground in terms of our ability to, can we actually like do this thing, which I think at this point we have successfully like shown that we can. It's also kind of a sample ground for the appetite of like true like decentralized storage that is actually fast, actually stable and secure, where you don't have to sacrifice your speed and stability for the sake of being, in quote Web3. And so like the fact that we've seen that number of storage accounts only consistently grow over the past year is, for us, that's huge. We see on average, anywhere from 130 to 150,000 daily active users using V1.5. And daily active users is a huge metric for us as well. Because, again, all of this is about sampling the appetite as we get ready to launch V2. Because the big focus with V2 is making sure that there's enough demand, making sure there's enough appetite so that when we turn it on, right, when it gets deployed and it is turned on and the network starts to govern itself, the operators that are providing storage are, fingers crossed, instantly profitable.
Yeah. And so that deployment process, maybe can just touch on that a little bit as well. Like, where are we at in the development cycle for V2? I guess everyone's sort of wondering that. You mentioned like later on this year. Is there certain stages you guys are going through at the moment? Like, is it built out, not built out, some more things, testing? Like, where are we sort of currently at in sort of the internal development cycle?
Yeah. And so this is actually something we're going to be releasing like a fully formalized roadmap for the rest of the year as relates to V2 and where we're at. But, it kind of comes into a couple of major stages, right? First of all, there's the kind of the Dagger, reconfiguration cycle. And, for those that don't know, Dagger is the consensus mechanism, the engine, if you will, of ShdwDrive that we built from the ground up. When we decided to go down the path of building ShdwDrive, we looked at it and said, we're going to need a custom consensus mechanism in order for this to work the way that we, are envisioning it to work. And so we built out kind of like the first version of that. And that's what powered testnet 1 and testnet 2. And then, we took like the learnings from testnet 1 and 2 and basically said, okay, where do we need to improve this thing? How do we need to reconfigure it, refactor it, in some cases, rebuild pieces of it. And that's the phase that we're working through right now. And fingers crossed, that'll be a couple of months, something like that.
Does that mean, I guess, a new consensus mechanism or a changed consensus mechanism for V2? Does that mean that there's going to be like a hard fork or something?
No. It's improvements, right? Things that make it, faster, more efficient. It's the same consensus mechanism, same underlying principles. But, there's parts that were built into V1 or, kind of Dagger's first iteration that we look at and say, okay, these are unnecessary, right? This is software bloat. Those things, like that when we built kind of like the first version of it and we're looking at it and saying like, all right, we're doing all of our testing in a closed environment, in a local environment. now that we've had, operators powering testnet 2, operators actually like contributing live storage, actually ingesting files, talking to one another amongst the P2P network, that brought with it a lot of learnings that said like, okay, X, Y, Z aren't necessary, right? And instead, like we need to beef up A, B, C. So yeah, it's always iterative. And then the next phase after that is taking what we've learned from, the deployment of the mobile platform and the mobile app at, Solana Crossroads, and then basically improving the mobile architecture. So that way, it's operating, at like kind of like the level that we want it to be. Again, these are all things that, you don't start to see a lot of the like, here's where we can get a lot of value for our time until something goes live, even if it's just an proof of concept. So yeah, so that's kind of where we're at with that. And then we're putting baking in a lot of time for testing. I think in Web3, there's always kind of this like rush to production, right? You rush to your production environment, get to mainnet as soon as possible. And for a lot of projects, that's totally fine. That works for them. Their users are fine, kind of being the guinea pigs, if you will, like mainnet, testnet type of thing. But, for our users and users of decentralized storage as a whole, they need to know their data's going to be there. They need to know it's going to be accessible. Yeah, it's huge. And so like I say, a lot of, I'd say probably half of the remaining time before V2 has been dedicated to just testing. And we as a team have kind of reached the consensus that like, we want to be testing the same thing so many times that, we're sick of it. We're testing it till we're blue in the face. So that way we know like when we push to mainnet, it's going to be the smoothest deployment ever.
Yeah. I think it was Anatoly was saying like a couple of weeks ago or something, he wants like the Fire Dancer deployment to Solana mainnet to just be boring, just be the most boring day ever. And I think that's actually something, especially when you're dealing with mission critical stuff, like when you're operating a decentralized storage network, like people need their data. And if people don't have their data, something screws up, that's really bad, right? So it's like you ideally just want to, as you say, do the boring things. There's a lot of people out there in Web3 that are, deploying a new shiny every day, but, the new shiny can blow up quite easily as well. And it does often. We see that every day as well. So yeah, it's certainly for some projects, maybe it's a luxury, maybe it's not, or at least the choice to deploy, quickly. Whereas some projects that are, running mission critical things, you can't just take these decisions lightly or hastily, right? There's a lot of testing to get into. I wanted to also talk about the mobile app. So you mentioned there and touched on it at Crossroads and stuff like that, how that's going to, expand the base for V2. And so what are the plans there? People download an app and I'm able to store stuff on device as well as the cloud. Like, I guess mobile is maybe it's certainly a different type of beast to deal with, right? Because, transfer rates, spotty coverage, maybe things uploading and downloading every so often, but not that often. Like, how are you sort of navigating the total switch from desktop world to a mobile world?
Yeah. So one like important distinction to make is for us, this has never been a switch. For us, mobile has always been like the target that we're aiming for. Again, we go back to like, we're a team that believes very strongly in iterative processes, right? We're building behind the scenes with mobile in mind. Mobile is the focus because ultimately, I don't think that any platform that is not pointing themselves at mobile, especially DePIN platforms, is going to survive in the long term. Like mobile phones are only getting more powerful. Mobile networks are only getting stronger and more stable. And ultimately, there's no way that as mobile devices increase in their processing capabilities and as cell networks and mobile networks continue to increase in their stability and their speed, there's no way that projects that are firmly rooted in server-based architecture only are going to survive. That's just kind of like the reality. It's far too expensive. It's far too resource consuming. And, ultimately, when you're looking at, say, like 5 billion mobile devices, that are currently like active right now around the world, and roughly another like 3 to 4 billion inactive devices, like old phones, old tablets that people just have lying around. There's a huge amount of resources and a huge amount of opportunity there, right? And we talk about like things like mobile networks being spotty, but how often is your phone not connected to a Wi-Fi network, right? No, that's no different than the desktop PC. And so that distinction is important because it's kind of, it's easy to see this as like, oh, hey, this is a pivot. They've made a huge change. How are they going to navigate this? So on and so forth. But, again, it's not a change for us. This has been part of the roadmap and part of the plan. And so for us, the transition to that is, incredibly seamless. focus on server-based architecture. Again, that was, that's learning, that's test bed. And it also gives us the opportunity to kind of like bring the community along with us in a way that is a little bit easier for them to digest. Given the fact that like what we're doing with a mobile architecture, is truly like a first of its kind. And that's scary for a lot of people, right? It's hard for some people to wrap their heads around. And so it's easier to kind of do things in digestible bites. So that way we get to the point where it's like, okay, now let's unveil the scary part, the part that, like we're super familiar with, and the part that is like true innovation. It gives people like the confidence to look back and say, well, okay, this team did do X, Y, Z though, and they did it really well. So let's trust them. And yeah, like the deployment of the mobile app as like a proof of concept at Crossroads was hugely validating. And there was a huge portion of our community that they just kind of instantly saw it and they instantly got it. And for them, it's, very energizing. And yeah, now for us, it's kind of like, all right, back into the trenches, back to building, back to doing those things that push us to mainnet. Because like the nice thing is mobile was like the last big unveiling, if you will. Okay, hey community, hey Solana ecosystem, like here's the big thing that ShdwDrive is doing. From here on out, it gets pretty boring, but in an exciting way, right? Because from here on out, it's like, okay, everybody is now aware of like, here's the bigger picture, here's the full picture, everybody can see it, let them digest it. And from now on, it's just us pushing to mainnet, us working on the production environment. And when I say it's like boring, but in an exciting way, this is the part where, we start to focus on marketing, start to focus on differentiating ourselves from other storage platforms and, just really getting the name out there and onboarding users.
Yeah. And, you said an important thing there, which actually got me thinking. So DePIN being kind of dependent or at least very related to mobile, like we've got Helium, right? They are the decentralized DePIN mobile network. We've got that Dashcam project as well, Hive or something like
Hive
that.
Mapper.
Hive Mapper, there you go. Also mobile. We've got, you guys as well targeting mobile. And I guess the key component here is maybe whenever anyone's bringing up this DePIN thing, and there was an article recently when you were sort of saying what is DePIN and what isn't, it's pretty important to focus on mobile because that literally is it, right? Like that is the most decentralized you can get. Like you said, 8 billion devices or however many are around the world, they're all getting more powerful all the time. Like there isn't anything more decentralized than that. Everyone kind of has a smartphone in most countries these days. So accessibility, I know Tolly's spoken about it many times before, and that's why Solana's doing the whole phone thing, because it's like, hey, crypto should be doing stuff on phones, and it generally hasn't. That's bad. We should try and change that. So I totally get the focus on mobile, and I think people should maybe relate DePIN a lot more to mobile networks in general and sort of mobile first products. Because when we think of DePIN, some people maybe think of validators and these sorts of whatever it might be, things from like 20 years ago when we're like P2P, whatever sort of system we're running, where the torrents or whatever, like it's like, yeah, that's decentralized infrastructure, I guess, but this is kind of on a whole new scale, right?
It is. It really is. Because the thing is, like decentralized, like server-based networks, there is still like a lot of gatekeeping around it. In order to participate as a network participant in like a Solana validator network, you have to know how to build a server, configure a server, right? You have to go find a server to rent. And that, it's not just Solana specific. That's all decentralized networks that are server based. And of course, there's like the big argument of like, well, hey, anybody can learn this. We make it super easy. You just got to go get a server. You just got to learn how to do some stuff in a Linux terminal. But we take for granted a lot of that fundamental knowledge that is just so intimidating to people that do want to get involved in Web3, do want to get involved in, helping to like power and expand the decentralization of DePIN networks. And, to your point, like, nothing's easier than downloading an app and flipping an app on. As a matter of fact, like phones have become so integral to our lives, over the past 20 years that upcoming generations, they're going to be much more like phone savvy than they are computer savvy. I read an article recently talking about how like upcoming generations, like they don't know how to use, let's say like, Photoshop on a computer, but they're wizards at it on their phone, right? And that's such a huge indicator of like where the technology is going. And I think developers like that get dogmatic in not only their beliefs, but their approach, developers that are ignoring that indicator are going to wake up one day and find themselves completely irrelevant. So I think you're right. Like there is nothing more decentralized than a network that literally anybody can connect to, anybody can easily pick up within just a couple of minutes. Because again, we really don't talk enough about how knowledge is a gatekeeper, and we can put all the resources out there in the world, but if it's still too intimidating for your average completely non-tech person to get involved with, then you're not as decentralized as you think you are.
Yeah. And I think some of those other projects in Solana have, like we mentioned, like the Hive Mapper and Helium, and there's some others as well. I know sort of running different projects wherever they might be around the world. Often they have like a global map, and you can see on the map like where people are running their different thing and their nodes and whatever. It's really distributed in most cases for all of these different projects, right? There's people just all over the world running these things. And especially like the Helium example, right? Where it's like, oh, you can broadcast internet to everyone all around you. I mean, that's relevant to everyone, wherever you might be in the world. And you see people just in the weirdest of places that you'd never have thought. But it's like, oh, okay, there's a node running there. But I guess it's kind of people often, like you say, there's gatekeepers. People are not able to participate. But if you lower those barriers, you actually do get decentralization. So the more that people talk about decentralization, a lot of people are maybe missing the whole boat when it comes to that, when it's like, actually, you should kind of look at some of these other projects that actually have some real geographic decentralization going on. What comes to mind is like things like the Nakamoto coefficient and stuff like that for Solana or any different network. So it's like how many nodes need to collude to like co-opt a network. Some networks only have 10 nodes or something like that, right? So it's very hard. But as you say, the requirements are so high to get involved in validating a lot of, you need documentation knowledge or Linux knowledge or whatever. It just sucks. And that's why they sort of stall their growth there, right? Whereas I guess if your growth is dependent on literally anyone, things like those sort of decentralization metrics, like they're going to moon like really hard because, anyone can now access it, right?
Well, I've said before, right? Like the biggest benefit, the biggest value that decentralized networks bring to the table is the fact that they can operate so cheaply relative to centralized networks, right? Like they are so much more cost efficient to run when they're done correctly. And that's kind of another aspect of like having a dogmatic focus on server-based architecture only. That's another like gatekeeping mechanism. It's another roadblock that's thrown up there, right? Because it costs $700, $1,000 a month to rent a server, and that's another blocker that keeps people out, right? Whereas mobile phones, they're everywhere, and the beauty of that is, right, is when you think about somebody that's renting a server, like you talked about just a second ago about networks seeing their growth stagnate, right? In terms of operators joining. Well, when I'm somebody who's running a server, it's $700 a month, $1,000 a month. My thought process, right, is that all right, I'm going to make $1,001, right, $1,100, maybe $2,000 a month, because I have to offset my cost first of all. And then I want to make something. And so networks that are only looking at server-based architecture, they're also making their lives harder, right?
Yeah,
because there's a hurdle. There's a huge hurdle to hit, right? Because they have to figure out the economics of like, okay, how do we make sure that operators are making $1,200, $1,500, $2,000 a month because they're paying $1,000 a month for servers. And you just don't have that in mobile networks, right? Like if I'm looking at my phone that I'm paying for anyways, I'm going to be paying for no matter what. And I say, oh, I can flip on an app and make $50 in tokens a month that, if they moon could be worth 5,000 or, whatever. Like, yeah, why would I not do that, right? If it's literally just every night I flip on the app and plug in my phone and connect it to Wi-Fi, cool. Like, why would I not do that? And that's one of the benefits that mobile architecture has that server-based architecture can just literally not touch.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge thing. And I think that will become more evident as time goes on. So you mentioned before, like roadmap coming soon, looking to do V2 deployment, hopefully this year, everything under testing and development and stuff like that. So yeah, are there any particular milestones that you're looking forward, maybe just in Solana in general, or what you guys are doing at ShdwDrive for the rest of this year? We're at the halfway point now. So this is kind of like a halftime check-in. Like where are we at? Where are we going? Where can we get to before the end of the year? We got Breakpoint at the end of the year as well. I think people will kind of be optimizing for like doing stuff before Breakpoint to at least go there and tell everyone how wonderful it is. Like I know, like we're going to try and do that as well in the Solana ecosystem. But like, what are you looking forward to over the next 6 months?
Well, so for us, we're at a point right now with ShdwDrive and with V2 where Like the milestone for us is that, as I said, like there's nothing big and new to unveil, right? And so
Yeah.
it's us looking at our architecture and saying like, all right, cool, everything works. It's built, it works. Now let's get it working in as optimized of a fashion as possible. And that's what we're doing over the next X number of months for the rest of the year. Technically, we could deploy V2 now. It's that build. But kind of to the point earlier, like that's not how you build a platform that is going to consistently grow and keep users over time. That's how you build a platform that, is going to feel rushed, is going to basically, you're going to deploy it and you're going to like win some users and then lose a bunch of users because there's bugs and things that your team is trying to scramble to fix and blah, blah. And very much like totally with Fire Dancer, we want the deployment for V2 to be as boring as possible. But that also allows us time to finish with mapping out and modeling like the changes to like the shadow token economics that we're working through and that we're hoping to announce as we get to breakpoint. So yeah, for us, those are the big milestones, announcing the kind of the revamped economics for the shadow token and basically getting through what is a very extended optimization and testing cycle. Yeah, I think for the ecosystem as a whole, it's interesting because as I said at the beginning, right, like we're very much at a decision-making point for the ecosystem in terms of like, okay, what's the next big thing? And so I think, between now and breakpoint, I think a lot of projects, a lot of teams are going to be asking themselves kind of that same question. And basically, it's going to be a little bit of a race to define what the new meta is.
Just on that point, like I think I made a tweet this week thing where I was like, we need more dApps. We need more like user-facing things. And like I saw some VCs funding some infrastructure, blah, blah, L2 thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, cool story. We've seen that a million times before, but we actually need more apps. And maybe that is the next sort of meta or something like that, where it's like people deploying like actual things that you can download. Okay, it's an app on your phone. It's something like that. It's like something that you can use and you can use it in daily life and it just works. And it's something that's actually valuable to you. Like, I think we just need more of that. We don't need like rehash.
So what we need over the next 6 months, in my personal opinion, is we need more projects asking themselves, okay, who cares? Why is anybody going to care about what it is that I'm building? And to your point, then turning around and building something that is actually like usable in people's daily lives and actually improves their lives. Don't get me wrong, like people, the who cares for, like meme coins is right. Like, well, I can try to, 10x my money. I can chase, kind of chase my next lotto ticket, if you will. But that doesn't give like legitimacy to Web3, right? Because, what ends up happening is there's going to end up being more bag holders that are losing money than there are like people that exit it, right? It's kind of how it works, especially in, illiquid markets, like we see with a lot of meme coins. So yeah, I think over the course of the rest of the year, I would love to see a lot more projects, asking that question of like, who cares? Like, why should somebody use the thing that it is that I'm building? And then not building something until they have a really good answer, right? Not an answer that they kind of like forced into, round peg, square hole type of thing, but something that actually like truly meaningfully like is like, okay, people are going to get excited about this. And it's where we started with this journey with ShdwDrive is why should anybody care about our decentralized storage network? Well, if we can provide storage that is incredibly more cost efficient than anything else out there in Web3, show the value that Web3, like decentralized networks truly bring to the table, and do it in a way that's as performant as existing cloud solutions, cool. That's a who cares. Like that's a why.
Absolutely. I think this is the right mentality to have. Really sort of excited to see what happens for the next 6 months. You heard it here first. We've got V2 coming sometime this year. It's just hard at work and it's doing the boring things, getting the boring deployment out of the way and then just building the app. So look, thanks so much for your time today, Frank. Where should people go to find out more? Should Twitter, Discords, shill the links. Where should people go?
All the above, discord.gg/GenesysGo, ShdwDrive.com, ShdwDrive.com, and then, our Twitter account at GenesysGo. All those things, great resources, great way for somebody who's new to what it is that we're doing or, just kind of wants to get started doing some research. Great places to start. That's all the documents you'll need.
Absolutely. We'll definitely go and check it out. This is one of the legit DePIN projects in the entire world. Pretty much DePIN, in my opinion, only exists on Solana because, you need the scale, you need the speed of transactions, you need low cost, blah, blah, blah. no other places really do that. And we do have DePIN projects actually scaling on Solana as well, which is awesome. So definitely go and check out what the team at GenesysGo is doing. We'll put the links below. Frank, thank you so much for your time today, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks so much for having me. Always a pleasure.
Cheers.